I didn't scream when they told me. I didn't collapse. I just stood there in my kitchen, still holding a dish towel, and said, "Okay, I'll be right there." That's the thing nobody tells you about losing a child. Sometimes the grief is so large that your body simply refuses to process it all at once. It shuts down everything except the basics. Breathe. Drive. Sign the papers. Breathe again. My daughter Serena was 34 years old. She had her father's love and my stubbornness, and she made the best sweet potato pie you've ever tasted in your life. She died on a Tuesday in October, which felt wrong to me. Serena was a summer person, bright and loud and warm. She didn't belong to a grey Tuesday in October. They said it was her heart. Sudden cardiac event. No warning, no history, nothing. She was at her office. She stood up from her desk, and then she was gone. That's how fast it happened. The paramedics said she probably didn't feel a thing. I told myself that was supposed to make me feel better. The funeral was the following Saturday. 240 people came. I didn't know Serena knew 240 people, but there they were, co-workers, college friends, neighbors from 3 apartments ago, people from her yoga class. Her husband stood beside me the whole time, one hand on my back, saying all the right things to all the right people. His name is Lawrence. He and Serena had been married for 6 years. He's the kind of man who irons his shirts on Sunday evening and never raises his voice, and always remembers to ask how you're doing before he starts talking about himself. I used to think he was almost too perfect. I used to think Serena had gotten very lucky. That Sunday morning, 2 days after the funeral, my phone rang at 8:15. I didn't recognize the number, but I picked up anyway because I was already awake. I hadn't really slept since Tuesday. The woman on the other end introduced herself as Patrice. She worked in the same office building as Serena, 2 floors up, different company. She said she had known Serena for about 2 years, mostly from the elevator and the coffee cart on the ground floor, but that they'd gotten friendly enough that Serena had her personal cell number. She said she was sorry for my loss. She said she'd been to the funeral in the back, and she'd almost called me 3 times since then and hung up before it rang. "Mrs. Holloway," she said, "there's something I think you need to see. Something Serena gave me to hold on to. She made me promise that if anything ever happened to her, and she said it like that, if anything ever happens to me, she made me promise I'd contact you directly. Not Lawrence, just you." I sat down on the edge of my bed. "What did she give you?" I asked. Patrice paused. "I'd rather show you in person." She suggested we meet at her apartment that afternoon. She gave me the address, a complex over in Decatur, about 20 minutes from my house. I wrote it down on the back of a sympathy card envelope because it was the closest piece of paper I could find. And I sat there for a long time after I hung up, just staring at her name in my own handwriting. Serena had given something to this woman, a woman I'd never heard of, and she had specifically said, "Don't tell Lawrence." I didn't tell Lawrence. He called me around 10 that morning to check in, and I told him I was resting, which wasn't entirely a lie. He said he was going to his brother's place for dinner, that he needed to get out of the empty house for a few hours. I said that sounded like a good idea. We said we loved each other the way you do when grief makes everything feel fragile, and then I hung up and got in my car. Patrice met me at the door of her apartment. She was maybe 40, small, with natural hair and reading glasses pushed up on top of her head. She looked like she hadn't slept well either. She brought me inside, poured me a glass of water I didn't ask for but appreciated, and then she sat across from me at her kitchen table and slid a manila envelope toward me. "She brought this to me about 3 weeks ago," Patrice said. "She was scared. She didn't go into all the details, but she told me enough. She said she'd found something and she didn't know who to trust. She said she didn't want it in the house." I opened the envelope. Inside was a folded set of papers. Bank statements, I realized, though not ones I recognized. And underneath those, a small notebook, spiral bound, the kind you get at the drugstore for $1.99. Serena's handwriting on the cover. Just 2 words. Keep this. I looked up at Patrice. She nodded at me, so I opened it. The first page was a date, June 14th of that year, and then in Serena's careful looping print. I think Lawrence has been taking money from the Caldwell account. I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong. Going to check again next week. I turned the page. I was wrong about something, not about my son-in-law. I had always thought if something like this ever happened to someone I loved, I would immediately know what to do. I had spent 32 years as a licensed practical nurse, and then another 8 years working in hospital administration, reviewing records and catching billing discrepancies that cost the hospital hundreds of thousands of dollars. I am not a woman who panics. I am not a woman who falls apart. I turned page after page of that little notebook, and I felt something I hadn't felt since the day my husband died, 11 years ago. I felt completely alone with a truth too heavy to carry. Serena worked as a financial coordinator at a mid-sized property management company. She handled accounts payable, vendor contracts, reconciliations. She was good at it. She had her father's head for numbers, and what she had found over the course of 4 months of careful, quiet observation was that someone had been redirecting payments. Vendors were being paid from a secondary account that had been set up 2 years prior under a shell LLC with a name similar enough to the company's real vendors that a quick glance wouldn't flag it. The money went in from clients. It went out to the shell. And the shell, as far as Serena could trace it, belonged to her husband. Serena wrote $340,000 over 18 months, maybe more. I've only been able to verify what I can access. There could be more that I can't see. She wrote, "He doesn't know I know. I've been acting normal. I don't know how much longer I can do that." She wrote on what turned out to be the last entry, dated October 2nd, 9 days before she died. "I'm meeting with an attorney on Thursday. I've made copies of everything. The originals are with Patrice. If something happens to me before Thursday, someone needs to know." She never made it to Thursday. I sat at Patrice's kitchen table for a long time. She brought me more water. At some point she put her hand over mine, and I let her because I needed something solid to hold on to. "Have you told anyone else?" I asked. "No," she said. "I almost called the police 3 times, but Serena trusted you, so I waited." I drove home with the envelope on the passenger seat. I didn't cry. I drove the speed limit. I stopped at a red light on Glenwood Avenue, and I looked at myself in the rearview mirror, and I thought, 67 years old, retired, arthritic left knee, and now this. I thought about Lawrence standing next to me at the funeral with his hand on my back. I thought about Serena writing, "I've been acting normal," in her $1.99 notebook. I didn't sleep that night either. But this time it wasn't grief keeping me awake. It was calculation. Here is what I knew. I had a notebook and some bank statements. That was not nothing, but it also wasn't enough. Not yet. A good attorney could argue the notebook was speculation. The statements showed the shell account but didn't definitively tie Lawrence to it by name. I needed to understand what I actually had before I decided what to do with it. I also knew something else. I knew how financial fraud worked because I'd spent 8 years catching a version of it in a hospital setting. I knew that people who do this rarely do it in a vacuum. There are usually more accounts, more transactions, more strings, and I knew that the longer those strings stayed untouched, the more likely they were to unravel on their own or get cleaned up by someone who knew they were there. I needed help. I needed someone who knew financial crimes. I needed someone Lawrence didn't know. I knew. I called my nephew Chester the next morning. Chester is 39, and he spent 12 years as a forensic accountant before he started his own consulting firm. I had not called Chester in 4 months. I called him at 7 in the morning, and when he answered, I said, "I need you to listen to me, and I need you to not ask me any questions until I'm finished." He said, "Okay." I talked for 45 minutes. When I finished, Chester was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Aunt Bev, where are you right now?" "Home," I said. "Stay there. I'm coming to you." Chester drove up from Macon that same afternoon. He sat at my kitchen table, the same kitchen table I'd stood at 4 days earlier when they called me about Serena. And he went through every page of that notebook and every line of those statements with a yellow legal pad and a sharpened pencil, and he didn't say a word for an hour and a half. When he finally looked up, his face told me everything before he spoke. "This is real," he said. "She documented this meticulously. Your daughter was thorough." "Yes," I said, "she was." The shell company is Greenway Property Solutions, LLC, registered in Georgia, February 2 years ago. He tapped the legal pad. "Lawrence has been married to Serena for 6 years, which means he registered this company before he would have had real access to her accounts." He paused. He planned this before she even started that job. I had to put my hand flat on the table to keep it from shaking. "I need to know what you want to do," Chester said, "because there are a few ways this can go, and some of them are safer for you than others." I told him what I wanted. I wanted Lawrence to face what he had done. I wanted it documented and proven and handed to people with the authority to act on it. I didn't want this to disappear into a civil suit that took 4 years and settled for a fraction. I wanted criminal charges. Chester said that meant we needed to bring in law enforcement, but we needed to do it right, with everything organized, no gaps, nothing that could be dismissed. He said he could spend the next few days pulling additional documentation from public records, cross-referencing what Serena had with corporate filings and tax data that was accessible without a subpoena. He said we should not, under any circumstances, let Lawrence know we had any of this. I agreed. What I didn't tell Chester, what I didn't tell anyone, was that Lawrence had already called me twice that day. Both times I let it go to voicemail. Both times he left a normal-sounding message. "Just checking on you, Beverly. Let me know if you need anything." His voice was warm and steady. He sounded like a grieving husband. I listened to those messages 3 times. I tried to find something in his voice that would tell me who he really was. I didn't find it. That scared me more than anything else. 4 days later, Chester called me with something new. He had traced the Shell LLC's registered agent, a third-party service, common enough, not suspicious on its own, but he had also found 2 additional LLCs registered to the same agent on the same date, both with similar naming patterns. One had already been dissolved. The other was still active and had received wire transfers totaling over $112,000 in the past 8 months. "He's running 3 of them," Chester said. "Serena only found 1. The total amount across all 3 was somewhere north of $500,000. The company Serena worked for had noticed discrepancies. Chester told me their accounting department had flagged unusual vendor activity 6 months ago and had quietly opened an internal review. They hadn't gone to the police yet because they were still trying to understand the scope. They didn't know who inside their organization was responsible. They were about to find out. Chester helped me organize everything into a single package: the notebook, the statements Serena had collected, his own documentation from public records, a clear written timeline. He went over it with me 3 times. He said, This is what we're giving to law enforcement. This is what they'll use. I agreed to everything. I initialed where he told me to initiate. I signed where he told me to sign. And then Chester said, I want you to promise me you won't have any contact with Lawrence before this is done. I promised him. I almost kept that promise. On a Wednesday evening, 9 days after I'd sat at Patrice's table, Lawrence came to my house. I hadn't invited him. He knocked, and when I looked through the glass panel beside the front door, I could see him standing there in a grey jacket, hands in his pockets, face doing that pleasant neutral thing it always did. I should have not answered. I should have called Chester. I should have done a lot of things. I opened the door. He said he was worried about me. He said I hadn't been returning his calls and he wanted to make sure I was all right. He said he missed talking about Serena, that being in that house alone without her was more than he could stand some days. He said it the way you'd say something true. I looked at my son-in-law and I thought, Serena sat across from you at dinner every night. She lay in bed next to you. She told you she loved you. And the whole time you were doing this to her. I let him in. I poured him coffee. I sat across from him at my kitchen table, which I now realize was a mistake, because I am not as good at hiding things as I thought I was. I don't know what was on my face. Something must have been, because part way through the conversation, Lawrence set down his coffee cup and looked at me in a different way than he had been looking at me. Are you sure you're all right, Beverly? He said. You seem... I don't know. You seem like something's wrong. More than just the grief, I mean. I'm 67 years old and I just buried my daughter, I said. There's a lot wrong. He nodded slowly. He said, of course, of course. He asked if anyone had been in touch with me, any of Serena's work colleagues or friends. He said it casually. He said it the way you say something that isn't casual at all. A few people have called, I said, left condolences. He nodded again. He picked up his coffee cup. If anyone tells you anything strange, he said, anything about Serena's work, any gossip, any rumors, I hope you'll come to me first. People say things after someone passes. Sometimes they don't mean well. They just want to be important, want to be part of the story. I'd hate for anyone to take advantage of you when you're grieving. I looked at him. He looked at me. I appreciate that, I said. I had my cell phone in my cardigan pocket. I had opened the voice memo app before I let him in. It had been recording for 41 minutes. That part I had not told Chester about, because Chester would have told me not to be alone with Lawrence, and I needed to be alone with Lawrence, and I knew from 32 years of watching people try to tell you one thing while their body said another, that Lawrence was worried. He had gotten worried. He was here to take my temperature. He stayed another 20 minutes. He hugged me at the door. He said to call him any time. After his car left my street, I stood in my own kitchen and I took 3 long breaths. Then I called Chester. I played him the recording over the phone. There was a long silence. Then Chester said, did he just try to preemptively discredit any witnesses? Yes, I said, he did. Are you safe? I'm fine, I said. Aunt Bev. I'm fine, Chester. Call your contact at the FBI field office. We're done waiting. Georgia has one-party consent for recordings. I had done nothing illegal. The recording, combined with everything else, was enough for Chester's contact to escalate the matter to the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, who had their own reasons to be interested. Reasons that turned out to involve the fact that Lawrence had moved money through accounts in 2 different states, which made it a federal matter. I found out later that they had been watching a related thread of activity for almost 8 months and hadn't been able to connect it. What Serena had documented gave them the thread they needed to pull. They arrested Lawrence on a Friday morning. He was at a coffee shop on Peachtree Road. I know this because Chester called me as soon as it happened, and he was trying to be calm, but I could hear something underneath the calm, something that sounded like relief, like justice, like the feeling of a door finally closing the right way. I sat down on my couch. I was still in my robe. The morning light was coming through the front windows the way it does in October, low and gold and a little sad. And I thought about Serena making her $1.99 notebook, writing those careful entries in her looping handwriting. I hope I'm wrong. She knew she wasn't wrong. She was never wrong about things like that. She was her father's daughter in that way too. She could look at a column of numbers and feel the wrongness before she could prove it. She proved it anyway. She documented everything. She made a plan. She did everything right. She trusted the right person to hold on to it. I called Patrice that morning to tell her. She cried. I stayed on the phone with her for a long time. I didn't cry, not then, but I talked about Serena. I told her about the sweet potato pie and the summer person laugh and the stubbornness she got from me. Patrice laughed at that. She said Serena used to make everyone in the elevators smile on bad mornings, that she had this way of saying good morning like she actually meant it and actually cared how your morning was going. I said yes, that was her. I cried later, that night alone, in the chair by my bedroom window. I cried for a long time, and when I was done I felt emptied out, but not hollow, more like a room after someone has finally opened the windows after a long time, something moving through that hadn't been able to move before. There are things I know now that I wish I had known earlier. I wish I had asked Serena more questions about her work, not because I would have necessarily caught any of this sooner, but because those conversations would have been more time with her. That's the thing that grief teaches you, the thing it teaches you over and over, no matter how many times you've already learned it. The ordinary moments are the ones you can't get back. The Tuesday phone calls. Sunday dinners. The elevator rides where someone says good morning like they actually mean it. I also know this. My daughter was not reckless. She was careful and she was smart, and she built a chain of evidence that held even after she was no longer here to explain it. She made sure someone would know. She made sure I would know. Even in the middle of her fear, she was thinking about how to make sure the truth survived her. There's not a small thing. That's everything. Lawrence faces federal wire fraud charges, money laundering and embezzlement. The company Serena worked for is cooperating fully with the investigation. The total amount identified so far is just over $620,000. There will be more to untangle. There always is with people like him. But the untangling has started, and it will continue, and he will not be able to stop it. I've thought about what to say to other women, mothers, grandmothers, women who are told to rest and grieve and let others handle things. I've thought about what Serena would want me to say. I think she would want me to say, if something feels wrong, it probably is. Your instincts are not grief talking. Your instincts are not hysteria. Your instincts are 30, 40, 60 years of watching the world and knowing when something doesn't add up. Trust them. And if someone you love hands you something to hold on to it with both hands. Even if you don't understand it yet. Even if the weight of it seems like more than you can carry. You're stronger than you think you are. I know because my daughter believed I was, and she was right. The thing I keep coming back to is Serena's handwriting on that notebook cover. Just 2 words, keep this. She didn't write help me or I'm scared or even read this. She wrote keep this, Because even in the middle of everything she was carrying, she was still thinking clearly. She was still making decisions. That kind of clarity under that kind of pressure doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from a person who has spent a lifetime choosing to be honest, even when dishonesty would have been easier. Lawrence made the opposite choice. I don't think he woke up one morning and decided to become someone who would steal from the woman he married. I think it happened the way most moral failures happen. One small compromise at a time, one rationalization leading to the next, until the person looking back at him in the mirror had become someone unrecognizable. He had intelligence. There's no question about that. You don't construct 3 shell companies and move over $500,000 without being smart. But intelligence without integrity is just a more efficient way to do harm. And eventually, no matter how carefully you build something on a rotten foundation, the weight of it brings the whole thing down. That's the part I want people to sit with. Not the drama of the arrest, not the numbers, not even my own grief, but the simple fact that Serena's careful, honest, thorough work outlasted him. She kept records, she wrote dates, she made copies. She found someone trustworthy to hold the truth when she couldn't hold it herself. Every single thing she did came from a place of moral clarity, of knowing that what was happening was wrong and refusing to look away from it, even when looking away would have been so much less frightening. I am 67 years old, and I have watched a lot of people move through the world. The ones who build something real, real relationships, real trust, real lives, are not always the loudest or the most charming or the most outwardly confident. They are the ones who do the quiet, unglamorous work of being honest, with other people and with themselves. Serena was one of those people. Chester is one of those people. Patrice, who held that envelope for weeks because she had made a promise, is one of those people. And here is what I've learned, or maybe what I've been reminded of. At 67, integrity and intelligence only mean something when they're backed by the will to act. Serena could have found those discrepancies and convinced herself she was misreading them. Chester could have told me the situation was too complicated and suggested I let it go. I could have decided I was too old and too tired and too deep in grief to be useful to anyone. None of us did that. Not because we're exceptional people, but because we made a decision, each of us separately in our own way, to keep going even when keeping going was hard. That's the only thing I know how to offer anyone who's watching this. Not a formula, not a system. Just this. When the truth lands in your hands, hold on to it. Do the work to understand it, and then find the courage to act on it, even when you're scared, even when you're grieving, even when the person you're up against is someone you used to trust with everything. Serena trusted me to carry what she couldn't finish carrying. I hope I did her justice. I think she would say I did.